Ready? Let us begin with a Surah Al-Fatiha for all of our Muslims. And for the love of the awaited Saviour of humanity, one loud salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الحمد لله الذي هدانا لهذا وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين خاتم النبيين سيدنا الممجد بشير المصدق المصطفى الأمجد محمود الأحمد أبي القاسم محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين ولعنة الله على الظالمين من الأولين والآخرين أما بعد فقد قال الله سبحانه وتعالى في كتابه المجيد وفرقانه الحميد وقوله الحق بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إن فرعون وهامان وجنودهما كانوا خاطئين آمنا بالله صدق الله العلي العظيم صلوات على محمد وآل محمد. Awaited Saviour of humanity, Imam al-Mahdi alayhi salam, my respected brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum jami'an wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to our third part in our series, analysing the media and trying to understand the challenges that come to us from various media outlets and how to navigate through biases and propaganda that may ultimately end up shaping our thinking, shaping our discourse. In the first night, we stated that any topic that we bring must be found and groomed within the ayat of the Holy Quran. And we stated that the verse that we've been using as the foundations for our discussion, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, Inna Fir'auna wa Hamana wa janudahuma kanu khati'in. Surely Fir'aun and Haman and their two armies, surely they were of the sinners. And according to our commentators, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks about the armies of Pharaoh and the armies of Haman, amongst the armies was the media system that they both had access to, and the way in which the pharaonic system and Haman, who was the representative within the government, were able to work together in order to try to attack Musa alayhi salam, in order to try to divert the thinking and attention of Banu Israel. By virtue of this, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us a foundation by which to understand the relationship between a pharaonic system and the various components underneath it. So for example, Pharaoh had Haman, Pharaoh had Qarun, which was the business entities, the elites from amongst the community. And he also had the magicians, which were able to create the narrative in regards to the religious ideals and the religious understanding. All of these different components worked together in order to create a narrative. In this way, you and I are able to understand how the Quran speaks about the building of propagandist ideology and how that can infiltrate a community and begin to shape the thinking and the actions of a community. Last night, in our second part, we began asking the questions of why do you see and why do you hear what comes from the media? What drives its content? And in order for us to understand that question, we talked about the different categories of the media. If we can go to the third slide, we will just mention to remind ourselves of what we spoke about yesterday. We stated that there are multiple categories of the media. For example, there is state media, there is independent media, there is neutral media, free media, and biased media. Normally, we tend to think of biased media only, but actually there are various different types. Amongst the most dangerous that we may not realize, which we will spend some time talking about, is neutral media. And we argued yesterday that what neutral media does is that it presents both sides of the argument or multiple sides of an argument as if they are equal. Why? Because they want to allow everyone to come and present their own thinking, irrespective of whether that thinking is grounded in haqq or otherwise, truth or otherwise. So we gave an example yesterday. You will have one group that will say, global warming doesn't exist. Global warming exists, but it's not created by man, or it's not driven by man's actions. Then you'll have a third group that says, global warming exists, and it is driven by the actions of mankind. These are three different opinions. However, a neutral media would not want to exclude any of these. Why? Because if it excludes one opinion, then it may not be able to get that group of watchers that believes in that opinion to come and listen to it. So it allows all three opinions to have airtime. So they will invite on people to argue all three opinions, irrespective of whether one opinion is correct or one opinion is not correct. Another way to look at this very same issue, you may have someone from the scientific community argue the case, and then you have a politician argue the opposite case. Now, the fact that the topic is grounded in science, these two people are not equal, but they will make out like the opinion of the politician is equal to the opinion of the scientist. Are these two opinions equal? No, they are not. The scientist, when it comes to science, should have the opinion. The politician should be learning from the scientist in this issue. But you will find that often both are placed as if they are equal in their understanding of a matter. This is neutral media. So we will talk about some of these things in detail as we come along. Now, what we did yesterday was we began to talk about what are the challenges that these different categories of media present to us. And if you recall, we showed you two videos, or we showed you one video and one audio. The audio came from an HBO series which is called The Newsroom. And if you recall, the audio spoke about the history and development of the American media and the institutions of media in the United States of America. And it explained the greatest problem that faces the consumers of news and the institutions that create the news is that those organizations don't do the service of the news for free. They end up having to create platforms of media that are content driven based around how much viewing they can get from it. Which means that they have to create the content in such a way that would be driving demand, that would be responsive to certain trends. This is why you get certain types of stories as opposed to other types of stories. For example, you might find that certain types of stories are what they call in the media they're goodwill stories. They make you feel good stories. So at the end of a news clip, or at the end of, say, an hour's newsreel or half an hour's newsreel, you'll often have a good news story. Dog saves baby. Father and son reunite after 60 years. Something of that nature. And they call this a good news story. Are they intending to tell you a good news story? Or is the idea that they want you to watch the show? And the idea is, if they get you to watch the show, more people watch it, they can sell more advertising space for a higher amount. Therefore, it is not content or the quality of the content that is driving what is being produced. Rather, it is ratings that drives what is being produced. So this was the first great problem that was spoken about. The second video we showed to you yesterday is a very famous clip from Jon Stewart, who was arguing with the two hosts of the show from Crossfire on CNN. The idea of Crossfire was that it was supposed to be a debate show where they would bring on politicians, hold their feet to the fire. In fact, they weren't doing this. As Jon Stewart argued, they were actually helping the politicians in shaping their own narrative. Meaning, they would ask questions that were softball questions. They would create a theatre by which the viewer thinks that there is debate, but rather the end goal is to help the narrative that the politician wants to get out. At the end of that clip, it was so important to understand that when Jon Stewart made those points, he ended up putting that show out of business, because people began to awaken to what was actually happening and the way in which CNN was creating its content, that they were actually helping the politicians drive their narrative as opposed to doing a service on behalf of the electorate. A line that came out from one of yesterday's videos was, "There is nothing more important than a well-informed electorate." If you are not well informed, then you will not be able to make sound decisions. This has been the problem historically with mainstream media, that because it is owned by certain corporations, certain individuals that have vested interests, it seeks ratings over content, and these are the greatest challenges to the media. Now, tonight, what we're going to do is we're going to shift the conversation about that question of what drives the media to decide what you see on it, and we're going to start talking specifically about what are those influences upon the media that make you see the content that you do. And what we're going to talk about is things specifically such like who finances the media. We're going to talk about what kind of national interest drives the content that you see. We're going to talk about the issue of access journalism, whereby certain journalists have to keep politicians sweet in order to get access to them, because if they don't, their access will be cut off and the breaking news stories will be given to others. And then we're going to talk about content marketing, whereby corporations end up writing articles for media. And then lastly, we're going to talk about lack of representation and lack of freedom within the media. And inshallah, this will give to us the various different influences that drive the content that you and I end up consuming as people who are trying to understand what is happening in the world today. Now, there's an interesting clip by Professor Noam Chomsky on YouTube. It's a short clip where he talks about the question of, is there such a thing as bias in the narratives or the narratives that are created in the media? And he argues that this is a nonsensical question. The question itself is wrong. He states you would never ask this question about any other industry. So for example, if I asked you the question, why do you end up having the type of car from the particular car maker that you do? For example, Toyota. Toyota ends up putting out a certain style of car, a certain type of engine of a car, Lexus, Chevrolet, Dodge, and so on and so forth. You would never ask the question, why do I end up receiving the type of car that I do from Toyota? You realize that Toyota is owned by certain individuals or by certain investors or as a public company. It has certain directors of marketing, of design, and they end up driving the type of car that is produced. You end up driving that Toyota because there are decisions above that end up deciding that the car is going to be shaped like this, designed like this, its interior is going to be like this, the engine is going to be like this. And you know, therefore, the similar question could come from anything else. Why do you end up consuming what you do from that particular company as opposed to anything else? The argument, Professor Chomsky says, is the same for any other news corporation. Why do you end up receiving that particular type of content? It's a nonsensical question. There are owners, there are directors, there are editors, there are people with ideas. They shape the content. That goes down into the types of journalists that they will employ, and therefore direct as to whom and how that is written or presented to you. And then when you end up taking that content, it is a produce of that particular line of thinking, all the way from top to bottom. So therefore, when anyone asks, is there bias? It is a nonsensical question. What we don't realize, however, is how the biases are constructed and what the various reasons are that go into the different biases that we end up consuming as people who take that news on. This is what we're going to look at a very general level before tomorrow going into some more specifics. So, what I want to do now is start showing you certain areas, and the first one is about financing. And I want to play you a clip from an issue in regards to CNN. Many of us, we end up looking to CNN for our news. Many of us think that CNN may be a trustworthy source or otherwise. It is up to you to decide. However, there was, in the time of the so-called Arab Spring, where CNN sent its journalists to cover various different Arab countries and what they were experiencing during the Arab Spring. One of their journalists, by the name of Amber Lyons, was in Bahrain and would go with some of the demonstrators in Bahrain. And she began to make various different documentaries, and she began to make various different clips, both independently and for CNN. In various different interviews, she actually explains that we had to sneak out the clips, the recordings in our clothes, because Bahraini authorities would search our belongings, and if they found content that they didn't want to go out, they would confiscate it. So in order to hide it, Amber Lyons says we had to hide it in our clothes. When she gets back to CNN, she tries to air the type of content that she has got with CNN to demonstrate what is taking place in the Bahraini revolution. However, to her surprise, CNN did not allow that content to be aired. Why? The answer is, the state of Bahrain sponsored CNN. Sometimes you will see that a country has an advert that says, for example, visit this country. Have you seen those kind of adverts? Often I end up seeing adverts for visit Israel, occupied Palestine, visit Switzerland, visit Scotland. What do you think, or whom is paying for that? That's the state, isn't it? That's the government that's advertising in the hope that their country will look good. They will only show you the best of the country, and it will gain visitors, which brings in economy, which brings in business, a multitude of effects and consequences. So now when the state of Bahrain is sponsoring CNN, if anti-Bahraini content is going to be aired on CNN, it may compromise Bahrain's advertising. Bahrain may state, we won't advertise with you. We'll advertise with, I'm just making up another organization, NBC News. So what will happen? CNN will lose out on the revenue. So now a choice is made. Do we air the content about Bahrain and the revolution and the types of human rights abuses that are taking place in Bahrain, or do we not air it? This is a choice that CNN had to make. Here, I will show you the video, and you will see what Amber Lyons herself says about the decisions that CNN took.
update on a story we brought you earlier this week. CNN International has fired Guardian reporter Glenn Greenwald for his accusations that the station purposely chose not to run a critical documentary about Bahrain for sponsorship reasons. The documentary, called iRevolution, was commissioned by CNN proper and was intended to take viewers from one country to the next as the Arab Spring unfolded and give them an inside look as both the revolution itself as well as the social media's impact on the revolution. Here's a look at the Bahrain portion of the documentary.
The protesters seem to have disappeared from Bahrain's capital thanks to the intense military crackdown. We ventured into another side of Bahrain, a side the government didn't want the world to see, to find out where they've gone. We drove to the Shia villages, passing military checkpoints as we left the capital. So we're gonna hang out with these protesters for a little bit. This is what the protests look like today. Young boys who've been hit with tear gas.
So what's the big deal with Bahrain? Well, CNNI has engaged in certain business arrangements called an association with the government. It offers countries the ability to pay for specific programs that spotlight their country. They are designed to portray a positive economic and social as well as political picture. Greenwald and others are asserting that the partnership with Bahrain is in regards to the CNN, has caused CNN to self-censor itself, a claim that CNN ardently disputes. CNN proper only ran the report once, and CNNI chose not to run it at all, which brings us to the next exchange between Glenn Greenwald and CNNI's PR team. The broadcast giant's PR team wrote a 6-point rebuttal to Greenwald's Guardian article, saying that it has extensively covered the unrest in Bahrain. Greenwald, in turn, wrote a response saying that CNN's defense was weak and avoided the real issues, like the station's alleged partnership with Bahrain. Then, the battle went to Twitter. CNN Public Relations wrote to Glenn Greenwald, nowhere in your piece do you link the 13-minute segment on Amber/Bahrain, which was broadcast around the world on CNNI, to which he replied back to the PR company, I expressly said she was on air in April and linked to those videos. Not even a good try. And then CNN rebutted back. They said, in April 2011, Amber Lyon appeared on CNNI's Backstory discussing her trip to Bahrain. And they linked to the video. So a little back and forth tiff here between Greenwald and the PR team. Even Amber Lyon herself got involved in the Twitter battle. She tweeted, these tweets by CNN are not true. The video linked is from April before the censorship. The documentary wasn't finished until June of 2011. Now, RT has tried repeatedly to get in contact with both Glenn Greenwald as well as Amber Lyon for her interview. So when we hear from them, you'll hear from us. But until then, this is always a good reminder to question the things that you see on TV.
There are other interviews later on. If you want yourself, you can go and YouTube. Amber Lyon does go on to RT and have multiple interviews with them explaining the fullness of the story. Fact of the matter is, as you heard, only once was her work shared by CNN, and the full-length documentary on CNNI was never shared. And there has been state sponsorship in multiple forms. So you can make your own conclusions, but the point I make is that these things exist, and the reason why you end up seeing or not seeing certain points of content, one of the reasons is because there has to be financing, and ultimately because they are a company that needs to make money, they are beholden to the sponsors that end up deciding whom they're going to sponsor or how much they're going to sponsor. Now actually, to go a little bit further to speak to this, again, I mean, because the audience is a Shia audience, I chose that clip about Bahrain, because we all have vested interest in our brothers and sisters' security around the world, human rights, and the crimes of Al-Khalifa, la'natullahi alayhim ajma'een, in Bahrain. There's something a little bit closer to home for you to be able to see. You may have heard CBS's news CEO, Leslie Moonves, speaking at a Morgan Stanley conference. Speaking where? At Morgan Stanley conference. I wonder how much Morgan Stanley may have sponsored CBS over time, and whether that influenced CBS's decisions to run or not run certain content. Speaking at a Morgan Stanley conference in February, this is 2016, CBS Chief Executive Officer Leslie Moonves said of Donald Trump's presidential run, it may not be good for America, but it's damn good for CBS. Why? Because the type of things that Donald Trump says brings in viewers. It's combative. It's salacious. It's a little bit theatrical. So that means that if they air it, they know people are going to watch their TV station. Ratings go up, they get to sell more advertising space, revenues go up. And it's a cyclical move. So here you can easily see two examples that even a CEO of CBS News is saying, we play Donald Trump, not because it's good for America, but it helps us in our ratings. This is really important to understand why you end up seeing what you see on the news. Next slide, thank you so much. Okay, here is going to be a real fun one. And I'm going to show you another reason and the pressures upon news and the drivers of the content in which you see. And I'm going to show you one clip and then two articles from the BBC. And we'll read the articles in a minute from the screen, inshallah. I'm going to show you a video from your former vice president. Who is your vice president? Previous vice president? Joe Biden, I'm glad, in civics, so not everybody ends up knows. You get those videos where, American youth don't know who their own VP is. That's why I was checking with you guys. Joe Biden is going to speak for 3 minutes. And he's speaking at a very prestigious university. This clip is very well known. It's very readily available on YouTube. And he's going to tell you whom sponsored ISIS, whom sponsored Jabhat al-Nusra, whom sponsored Al-Qaeda, to the tune of how many billions of dollars of weapons, and for what reason. Having understood what the VP of the US says, let us then see how the BBC begin to frame some of these issues.
The constant cry was that our biggest problem is our allies. Our allies in the region are our largest problem in Syria. The Turks, who are great friends, and I have a great relationship with Erdogan, which I just spent a lot of time with. The Saudis, the Emiratis, etc. What were they doing? They were so determined to take down Assad and essentially have a proxy Sunni-Shia war. What did they do? They poured hundreds of millions of dollars and tens of thousands of tons of weapons into anyone who would fight against Assad, except that the people who were being supplied were al-Nusra and Al-Qaeda and the extremist elements of jihadis coming from other parts.
Listen to what he just said. The problem was our allies. The Saudis, the Turks, the Qataris, the Emiratis. They were giving hundreds of millions of dollars of weapons to anyone that would fight Assad in order to create a Shia-Sunni war. He's actually stated that the allies are the ones who created and funded Jabhat al-Nusra in the region, in Syria, in Iraq. You can't get any more blatant than that. I mean, that clip should have been at least every single news station in the world should have been playing that. Can you get a more credible source than the VP of the United States of America say, Saudi, Qatar, Turkey, the Emiratis, to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars, were giving weapons to ISIS, to al-Nusra, to Al-Qaeda? Hands up, how many of you are seeing that clip for the first time? Keep your hands up. Out of everyone, there's only 2 people in the gent side that haven't got their hands up. Sisters? subhanallah, almost all of you, almost, I think there's 3 that haven't seen that clip, that have seen that clip before. That's like 95% of you. That's your VP. Shouldn't that be frontline news? Wouldn't that reshape the thinking in regards to Al Saud, to Qatar, to Turkey? But you've never seen that clip before.
It never came on 9 either.
Oh, it's on YouTube. The title of it is Joe Biden, ISIS terrorist armed by Turkey, Qatar, Saudi and UAE.
Like Yahoo News or MSN News.
Of course it won't be played by mainstream media. Even independent media have never played this. Trust me, I searched. Now that should have been like everywhere, shouldn't it? That would just change the game. People would be, especially at the height of the discussions on ISIS and Jabhat al-Nusra and everything, if they knew whom was sponsoring. I mean, in the science of ilm al-rijal, we have, who's thiqa, who's trustworthy. You can't get someone more, in your own country trustworthy than the VP saying that. Yeah? He's thiqa.
We have one thing they cannot do without their permission.
Of course, so that makes the obvious point. Well, who is the sponsors of Saudi? Who's the protectors of Saudi? So they knew all along that Saudi and Qatar and Turkey are giving weapons to Jabhat al-Nusra and to Al-Qaeda. Who's protecting Saudi? American government, British government. So who's ultimately at the top of it all?
So how legitimate his argument is? Then the question arises that, is he really telling us the true argument, or...
He's telling us the true argument. This was a foreign relations discussion at, I think it's Harvard University or Princeton, I forget which one. We can go and check the thing later on, some of the content stuff. But this tells you how... Where is it? Does it say? Is it Wesley? Sorry, no, where is it? Does it not say that? Okay, well, in one of the... there's various versions of the same clip. I forget which US university. It's a leading Ivy League institution. Anyway, my point is, now he's admitted Qatar and other countries are the funders directly to Jabhat al-Nusra, to Al-Qaeda. And of course, we know which countries are protectors of Qatar. Now I wish to show you 2 articles from the BBC and show you the way in which they frame the discussions around Qatar being sponsors of Al-Qaeda. Surely, in a post-2011, post-9/11 world, the sponsorship of Al-Qaeda would be the biggest point for the US public to know and to understand. War on terror, tragedies in New York, and so on and so forth. Let's go to the 2 articles on BBC, inshallah. And this one comes to us from 2016. Now this is when Al-Nusra announced that it would split from Al-Qaeda. So at the beginning they were together, and later on they split from each other and became 2 independent organizations. Let's read and see what the article says. And remember, I'm asking you to understand the way in which BBC, who should have proper journalists, if I can find that clip, surely BBC know of that clip, right? So let's see how they discuss Al-Qaeda, Jabhat al-Nusra, and particularly Qatar. Syrian jihadist group Jabhat al-Nusra, also known as Al-Nusra Front, has announced it has split from Al-Qaeda. The US responded saying it saw no reason to change its view of the group as a terrorist organization. White House spokesman said the US also had increasing concerns that the group intended to attack the West. If we can go down a little bit further. Okay. Why did Nusra detach from Al-Qaeda? In the recording aired by Al Jazeera's Arabic news channel, Jolani thanked the commander of Al-Qaeda for having understood the need to break ties. The group's leader stated, "We're breaking ties, we thank you for working with us, Al-Qaeda, we're separating from you." He said the decision was made to expose the deception of the international community, namely the US and Russia, in their relentless bombardment and displacement of the Muslim masses of Syria under the pretext of bombing Al-Nusra Front. The new group will have no links whatsoever with foreign parties. I'm just asking a question. So far from the BBC, have you seen anything about who sponsored and created and gave money and weapons and monthly salaries to Al-Nusra? No. This is a BBC article telling you the breaking news. Al-Nusra and Al-Qaeda are splitting up. Despite everything, not a word about who sponsors. Surely that would be at the forefront of the BBC News article. Ask yourself this. Why would BBC not bother to mention who sponsored Al-Nusra and Al-Qaeda? Surely a reputable agency as wide as BBC, responsible to the world, would tell you. Nothing in this clip so far. Last week, US Secretary of State John Kerry and his Russian counterpart said they had agreed on concrete steps to tackle the jihadist groups like Al-Nusra and so-called Islamic State. Al-Nusra was excluded from the agreement. Al-Nusra first announced its existence. Here we come to this one line. It has been claimed that Qatar has relatively close ties with the group, probably through intermediaries. Can you see how watered down it is? It has been claimed. Okay, who claimed it? The VP of the US. You can't get a stronger source. It doesn't mention. It has been claimed. Qatar has relatively close ties to Al-Nusra, probably through intermediaries. Are you doing your job, BBC? Or are you pulling the wool over people's eyes? Nonsense. Nonsense from the BBC. But how many people here would have trusted the BBC before reading that? Thinking it is a legitimate news source. Next one, please. Thank you very much. This one now is in 2017. So we're giving them a whole year to get their editorial right. I'm going to be fair. BBC, you have a whole year. Sort your lives out. Why Qatar is the focus of terrorism claims. Okay. So now we have a question that should be focused on the relationship between Qatar, Al-Nusra, Al-Qaeda. You can't go wrong, can you? Surely they're going to give you something real, useful here. Real, help you out to understand what's happening in the Middle East. Okay, let's have some fun. The dispute that has seen Saudi Arabia and its Gulf allies isolate Qatar stems from allegations that the tiny gas-rich nation is sponsoring extremist groups which are destabilizing the Middle East. Okay. Who is at war with Al-Qaeda? The US, apparently. Yet the dispute is between Saudi and Qatar. The dispute that has seen Saudi Arabia and Qatar about sponsoring extremist groups. This is not the first time Qatar's neighbours have expressed their displeasure over its individualist foreign policy. Individualist foreign policy. It's professional. It's how do I describe it? It's foreign policy. It's official, right? It's not sponsorship of Al-Qaeda, head chopping, building blowing up, takfiri individuals. It's a debate on their foreign policy, Baba. Should we get involved in their foreign policy? I don't know if we should. Now, obviously, as a point, the debate between Saudi Arabia and Qatar, arguing who, sponsors terrorists is like McDonald's telling Burger King that why are you making, fast food, junk food. It's the same thing, right? But anyway, tensions. There's problems between people. Tensions have arisen from Qatar's support for Islamist Muslim Brotherhood, its close relationship with groups such as the Taliban and certain Al-Qaeda affiliates, and its relationship with Iran, which has most recently led to allegations from Saudi Arabia that the state-funded broadcaster Al Jazeera is supporting Houthi rebels. Huh? Why are you bringing in Houthi rebels? In Yemen, fighting government forces backed by Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. Doha has strongly denied Riyadh's accusations and said it has taken more robust counter-terrorism messages than some of its neighbors. It's a big debate. We don't know whose side to be on. They're all arguing these different terrorist groups and all. It gets a bit messy, doesn't it? It's very heavy for the average reader to figure out what's going on. Okay, now, as we go down in the article, we carry on reading the next part, right? So we've just gone down to the very next part of the article. Remember, look at the top of go back to the very top of the article. What's the discussion? Why Qatar is the focus of terrorism claims. Okay, now go back down, please. Thank you. Now we're coming to the main part of the article, middle part of the article. Yet, this is the latest row this latest row is shining a particular light on the role Qatar plays with its immense wealth. Okay. In April, it reportedly paid a ransom as much as $1 billion to a former Al-Qaeda affiliate in Syria and to Iranian security officials as part of a deal that resulted in the release of 26 royal family members reportedly kidnapped by Iranian-backed Iraqi Shia militiamen and dozens of Shia fighters captured by jihadists in Syria. Where is the focus of this article? The monies that have been paid to kidnappers by Iranian-backed Iraqi Shia militiamen. I thought the title of the article was trying to focus on Qatar and their sponsorship of terrorists, not how much they have to pay for the release of their own royal family members from kidnap. Now if you scroll down a little bit more of the article, there you go, it's all finished. You know, it's not, you know, what's going on here? BBC twice. You have an opportunity to raise the point. Evidence that Qatar has been sponsoring Al-Qaeda and Jamaat al-Nusra. Where is it? So here we can go back to the PPT, thank you very much. We have a second problem, which is national interest. And the way in which certain nation states have an interest in what you see is the output that you end up reading and imbibing from those outlets. I wonder how much you will trust CNN and BBC after what we have just told you. Next slide tells us about another challenge to media, and this one is access journalism. And I'm going to quote to you from The New Yorker, which speaks, or this article and these two paragraphs are written immediately in the aftermath of the last, you know, Michelle Wolf, she did the White House Correspondents' Dinner a couple of weeks back. And that was a lot of fun. So now, in light of that, and the concept of access journalism, meaning where organizations, journalists need to have access to politicians in order to get information from them, it means that they have too close a relationship. If I'm too close with you, it may be that I can't criticize you, because if I criticize you, you won't give me access anymore. You'll give access to someone else. So now I have to temper what I ask you, how I ask you, what I'm going to put out. And in the aftermath of Michelle Wolf's very good speech at the White House Correspondents' Dinner, this article was written, and I'm only giving you a couple of paragraphs from it. The White House Correspondents' Association Dinner is a peculiar institution. It brings together White House correspondents, other members of the news media, and the people they cover, the people they're covering, government employees and elected officials. In years past, though not so much in the Trump era, it also attracted a gaggle of Hollywood celebrities. Now, many Hollywood celebrities are against some of these practices, and they don't come to these events. What makes these dinners possible are fictions about civility and performance. You are seeing a fiction, not truth, about the civility between these groups. Between which groups? Between White House correspondents, the people that they're in the media and the people they're supposed to cover. There is a fiction that holds that journalists and their subjects can eat and socialize together and yet maintain the distance necessary to continue performing in their own professional roles. There is a fiction that they can laugh at one another and themselves and not take offense, that the divisions amongst guests are ultimately bridgeable, that all of them inhabit the same reality, and that both the humor and the objects of the humor are innocuous. Next slide. The same fiction continues to dominate our public sphere. Internally, they have this fiction, and we also live within this fiction as well, thinking that these two groups coexist happily together. In this story, Trump performs the role of the president, albeit poorly, and those in the media maintain a strained civility in their coverage of him. The media have to be civil towards the president. They won't treat him the same way they may treat Sayyid Khamenei or Putin or Morales, for example. Trump performs the role of the president, albeit poorly, and those in the media maintain a strained civility in their coverage of him. In this story, the statement that the president is a racist is somehow still controversial. Therefore, the media has to play with that statement in order to carefully construct it in a way that doesn't put off its viewership. So, for example, understand this. You here generally live in a bipartisan world, in a bipartisan country. If I say something that's going to put off 50% of the audience, they may never return back to me. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to state something in a way which bridges the gap between both of you. It pleases both of you. I make the Democrats happy, I make the Conservatives happy, and the group in the middle can decide which way they go. But I will create civility as opposed to telling you the truth of what's happening. In this story, the media can discuss his affair with a porn star and even the question of whether he used a condom without undermining respect of the office. This is an essential pretense because respect for the office of the president is indeed a value that should transcend the current presidency. Do you remember I spoke to you about the first night about the Overton window, where certain ideas are within a bracket? Anything that falls outside of that is considered extreme, weird, impossible, radical to be asked. Why is it that it's essential to have respect for the office of the president? This is an essential pretense because respect for the office of the president is indeed a value that should transcend the current presidency. But it is this pretense and these fictions that cast a pall of unreality over most media coverage and make late night comedy shows the better news outlets. And I think many of you will have seen this. I tend to get my news often from, what was the original fake news? Satirical news. It is this pretense that makes late night comedy shows better than news outlets, and then there is the pretense that the late night comedians exist in a parallel universe, separate from the television channels that broadcast them. This is another challenge that we have, the third challenge, which is access journalism, which means what you receive is very tempered because they do not want to lose their access. It's interesting, I remember seeing some of the first, you will all remember, some of the first White House questions, or, you know, the, what's his name? Who's the first gentleman that was the White House representative for news? Sean Spencer, thank you. Sean Spicer. So Spicy, as he was known by some, when Spicer was first giving his, he started on certain lies, right? The inauguration was attended by more people, the most number of people watched the inauguration in the history of, and so on and so forth. At that point, the White House correspondents should have got up and walked out and said, "We will not allow you to lie to the American people. We will hold you accountable." And I wish maybe tomorrow to show you some more of these. But if they had the unified strength to state, we will not allow you to lie to the American people, then he would never have been able to get away with it. And you ended up having alternative facts. Do you remember that? That week of scandal. Alternative facts. As we talk about the Islamic epistemology in 2 nights' time, we will tackle as to whether we're allowed to take alternative facts or not. Access journalism is the third greatest problem that we have. The next one, and we'll be wrapping up inshallah in a couple of minutes, and we won't talk too much about this because maybe you guys can see it for your own selves. But what we have, especially in online journalism today, is that articles are actually written by corporations and placed in the online magazine or your newspaper outlets, and you think it's written by the newspaper as journalism, but actually it's being written by a sponsor. You see, previously, if you wanted to advertise, what you would do is you'd take a picture of a Chevrolet, right? And you'd put it into the newspaper, and it would have a nice deal, you know, get this much per month, or this is how much it's going to cost you per month. Then later, of course, as we went all more online, it started to be short videos, didn't it? As part of the article. Sometimes they pop up and you have to click exit. Sometimes they're embedded inside of the article and you may have to open it yourself. The way in which it's going now, instead of paying for a picture or paying for a video, the corporation pay to write an article and it's put in as part of your magazine, part of your newspaper. You think it's journalism. It's been written by the corporation itself. That's the way the new advertising is. Can you be... I can't imagine something that dupes you more than that, than thinking it's honest journalism. But it's written by the corporation itself. So now, if Chrysler want to talk to you, if BP wants to talk to you, are they going to talk to you about global warming? Are they going to tell you all the positive stuff about BP, about Chrysler? Yes. McDonald's. Think about the health issues around McDonald's. What goes into it? Whether you're actually eating food at all, or whether it's just cardboard and sawdust. But if they are the ones that are allowed to write the article, and it tells you all about the great health benefits, by the way, now in our Happy Meal we also give you 2 slices of an apple, so your kids can grow up healthy. MashaAllah. This is the next great problem that you're finding in the media. When you read something, please, please, see it through discerning eyes. Understand what's happening in front of your eyes. Now, to show you this, again, if you want to see some of these details, the journalism startup business called Contently has made itself a business by connecting big brands with freelance journalists. Journalists get to work for big brands, so that those journalists do the good writing on behalf of the big brands. We're going to talk about this in the next 2 nights, 3 nights, so I haven't talked about it here, but I didn't want to forget about it. One of the biggest problems is lack of representation, especially Muslim representation in the media, and within that, certain sects as well are very underrepresented. So from my own immediate audience, the school of Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam, we are heavily underrepresented in the media. Therefore, our position on many topics are not coming to the forefront. But we will talk about this in one of the nights when we talk about the Islamophobia industry and how to tackle that. Last one, about the challenges that I'm going to talk to tonight, is very simply that sometimes in media there are lack of freedoms. You don't get to say what you want to say. And there has been, a couple of months ago, only 2 months ago, there was, every year there's an annual indices of how free journalists are in a certain country. So for example, if you want to break news that your government is doing A, B and C, are you allowed to or not? And you all can think about WikiLeaks and other sorts of issues that have come out recently. What are the loopholes of whistleblowing? To what extent are you free to be able to talk about what happens in your own country or with certain corporations? tax implementation, all these sorts of things. According to this, the UK is ranked 40th in the world for freedom of journalism. In the US, it's 45th in the world. Which means you are not that free to be able to break honest news in this country. The likelihood is there will be means to prohibit you, means to sue you, ways to stop you from being able to express what you want to be able to express. You think that you live in a free and open society, but actually there are many, many disadvantages that happen when you work in journalism. This is again one of the biggest challenges to dealing with the pressures of journalism and why you end up seeing what you see or not see what you end up not seeing. Last slide. The Arabic appears to be misformatted, but here you can read the English. Islam has a view on being just as opposed to being beholden to interests of rich, elite, powerful, the ability to sponsor, the ability to sway and have influence on you. In letter number 27, Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib salawatullah wasalamu alayhi writes to Muhammad ibn Abi Bakr, the son of Abu Bakr, who was going to be the governor of Egypt. He writes, it's a beautiful, normally when it comes to Imam Ali alayhi salam's advice to governors, we only know one famous letter, which is the one to Malik ibn al-Ashtar. So we think that's the only letter. No. Of course, Nahj al-Balagha has many letters dedicated to good governance. Letter 27 is phenomenal as well. Inshallah, one day maybe we have a tawfiq to be able to go through both letters. Letter 27, the opening lines. This is how Imam Ali alayhi salam opens his letter. In the first paragraph, he says, "Accord them, your subjects, whom you govern over, accord them equal treatment, so that the big, the powerful, the elite should not expect injustice from you." The powerful, in their lobbyists, they expect that they can bargain with you, they can have an influence over you, right? But deal with them equally, the poor and the rich, such that the great, the big people, the famous people, the rich people, they don't expect injustice from you in favors, and the low people of the community do not become despondent from your justice. Both expect justice from you. Allah, the Sublime, will certainly question you, O community of His creatures, about your actions, be they small or be they big, open or concealed. If He punishes you, it is because you have been oppressive, and if He forgives you, then it is because He is the most generous. Here we have a principle about access to rich, powerful, influential people and organizations. Imam Ali alayhi salam tells his governors, when you act justly. Don't act in a way in which the rich expect favors. And don't act in a way in which the poor believe that you will never look after them. Be just to both of them. Otherwise, if punishment comes to you, even if you did something minute, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will take you to account for it. Here, brothers and sisters, are some of the overriding challenges and pressures upon the news media and why we end up seeing what we see. Tomorrow, inshallah, we will start going into certain specifics about how narratives are built, how biases are built, and how we can begin to expose those. And then, inshallah, we go into an Islamic epistemology, and then we end up talking about where we can get positive and accurate news from, inshallah. I hope this has been of benefit to you so that you understand what is happening in the world of media. Walhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahumma ala Sayyidina wa Nabiyyina Muhammad wa alihi at-tahirin. We have 5 minutes or so for any constructive feedback, criticisms, things that you would like to comment on, questions, inshallah. I don't claim to have all the answers, but we welcome any points that you may have, inshallah.
one of the largest, you mentioned WikiLeaks, and sources that aren't beholden to corporate entities. And the biggest criticism that they get is that, yes, okay, CNN, MSNBC, etc. are, beholden to corporate entities, and they pretty much, work for them instead of actually giving
For people.
the people
Yeah.
the information that, accurate information that they deserve to hear. But in a lot of instances, the one, I guess, positive that's mentioned is that their news is verified. At least it usually is verified. And that these other sources aren't. A large example is during the Boston bombing, a lot of news was coming through Twitter and social media.
Citizen journalism.
Exactly. And even I think John King from CNN even got one of his sources wrong because
Massively.
he couldn't get through Twitter. Could you comment on that and how to?
We were planning on commenting on that in the discussion on an Islamic epistemology, where we look at what is truth and false, and how to judge what is true and false, how to judge individual narratives versus collective narratives. So we will come to it, inshallah, specifically about citizen journalism, because it is a massive part of our modern day construct. As you said, Twitter, but you also started with WikiLeaks. So WikiLeaks is a form of citizen journalism, but it actually goes through very high standards of scrutiny. Whereas, let's say, the types of things that may come out as breaking news from citizen journalist individuals on Twitter doesn't go through that same level of scrutiny. But we will talk about it, inshallah. So thanks for raising it. But it will be more appropriate to talk about it in full rather than a very short 1-minute answer. Is that okay? Thank you very much. Can I go to the sisters first? Is there any points, comments, criticisms?
I'm just curious, who's at the top of the list for, I guess, freest journalism? If the UK is 40, US is 45, remember in past?
Norway and Sweden.
Oh.
And who do you guess is at the bottom?
Yeah.
Who do you guess?
South Asia.
Where? Which? Give me. I've checked it. So who do you think? Some of the countries. Yeah.
Saudi would be on there.
It's not one of the bottom 5.
Yeah.
It's not. No.
Interesting.
Yeah. No, Israel's not bottom 5. So
Pakistan.
no. China
Oh yeah.
and Syria. Considering they're in a state of war, it would have been. It's obvious that they would be probably very heavily influencing what comes out and what doesn't come out in their country. So you can have a look, inshallah. We can open up the list. Do you want to open up the list? Either one of the... And in the meantime, we can take the question from Uncle. Maybe, I'm sure in there will be the... if you open up and then find the list in the actual... Or what, I'm sure I'll comment who's in which area, who's at the top. I think it's Norway and Sweden is at the top, I think.
What about France?
Sorry?
France?
I don't remember all the countries, sadly, out of all 140. But I remember Sweden and Norway, if I remember rightly, is at the top. Keep going down. That's 2016's list.
If you click on in the report, who released
Okay, there we go. North Korea, we could have guessed. Eritrea, Turkmenistan, Syria and China were ranked at the bottom. Well, they have a lot of emigration at the moment, right? And refugees. So it is interesting that maybe you can find the actual list and we can have a flick through it in the meantime, inshallah.
Compared to these networks, I don't know, they are not readily available on the networks, but 2 channels. One is Link TV and another is FSTV.
Link TV and FSTV.
Yeah, they are both available on the internet as fstv.com.
Yes, these are independent medias, correct?
linktv.com.
Yes.
And that is where you can find perhaps, since they are running their own programs,
Yes.
at times you can find these documentaries which will cover what the networks won't.
Correct, exactly. They will cover what the networks won't, And for their perspective, breaking news or the biggest news headline in the world will be very different to the headlines that say mainstream media give. So when we come to the last lecture, which will be specifically on the topic of where to get your news from, or my biased recommendations of where to get the news from, we will bring up some of these different organizations and individual journalists that I will recommend that you may want to follow in order to get a different perspective from mainstream media. Maybe, did we find it? If not, then, okay, excellent. Are there any other questions or comments? Fadal.
You mentioned sponsorship for, media.
Yes.
We know, but on the other hand, I feel that there is also sponsorship in another way.
Please.
Which is in social media, if there is a hashtag, for example, let's say Bahrain.
Brilliant.
And the oppressed people who want to, raise their voice.
Yes.
And raise their awareness and, share anything. But on the other hand, they support and sponsor what they call in the Middle East as electronic flies.
Electronic flies.
Like they just, you see fake usernames.
We're going to come to this tomorrow in detail. So tomorrow, I said for the feed, there's another type of sponsorship, which will be, for the brother is saying hashtag, and that will create, for example, what is trending, what is not trending, and if there's something trending, they can create something else in opposition to trend over it, right? So if there's local news about, let's say, a demonstration in Bahrain, that hashtag will be created. But the government will create a rival hashtag, which will trend greater. What will they have? They will have bots. Have you all heard of bots? You've probably heard of Russian bots, haven't you? Yeah. So these are created, and anonymous accounts are created to be able to sponsor and create news and what is trending and what is not trending. Tomorrow night, one of the things we're going to look at, inshallah, is we're going to look at echo chambers and how you end up hearing the same thing from multiple sources, and how bringing up what you mentioned, how news is created, and ultimately, the narratives that are created. What is trending, what is not trending. That's tomorrow night's discussion, inshallah. Ahsantum. We're focusing tomorrow on the issue of echo chambers and seeing the biases that are created within the echo chambers. So you end up thinking this is news, these are the various things that need to be spoken about. So here we are, Norway, Sweden, Netherlands, Finland, Switzerland, Jamaica, Belgium. Keep going down. Germany is 15. What countries are we looking for? Uruguay at 20. Canada and Australia in the top 20. Good, excellent. South Africa. Keep going down. France was 33, as you asked. Chile at 38. It's good.
Pakistan.
Where is Pakistan? 130. Ya Allah. Ya Allah. Keep going down. United States at 45.
We come from Pakistan, so we have 3 countries.
Yeah, I want to know where Nigeria is at. Guyana, Fiji, Poland, Dominican Republic, Haiti, Japan, Hong Kong. Let's keep going down towards Nigeria. 119 out of 140. They're doing very well. I'll tell you why. We were talking about this yesterday, that there's indices for the most corrupt countries in the world, i.e. corrupt governments' ability to make influence. And the top 2 most corrupt countries in the world are Pakistan and Nigeria. So the fact that Nigeria is only 119 out of 140, it's doing well in that indice, Any other questions?
Could you please let us know more about there in America there's party neutral party which is called, I think, Green Party or.
Yes. Well, again, they're not neutral. They have their biases or their principles by which they work from.
But I listened to them and I found they are very very much humane, and they talk more about.
I know, it's terrible, isn't it? I'm kidding. I know. Dr. Jill Stein, yes, who's the head of the Green Party? Yeah, may Allah bless her and grant her long life to continue doing good work. I think that Dr. Stein is great, and I think the Green Party is great. As you know, the narrative that was created in the 2016 election is that if you vote for the Green Party, you're throwing your vote away. Yeah? Where did that idea come from?
I did vote for them.
You did? May Allah vote for them as well. Iraq is at 160. Iran is at 164. Is that right? Out of 180. Sorry, not 140, 180, thank you. North Korea, 180 out of 180. Okay? So here, I hope inshallah you've seen some of the challenges. What I want all of us to do, especially my younger generation who aren't here as much now because high school's still going on, so on and so forth. I understand it's a long day for them. But those of you who are parents, elder brothers, uncles, teachers in the madrasa, we really need to help wake up people. Because even our own Muslim community is so much beholden to some of these narratives that they end up thinking no different to any other person who is imbibing some of these narratives as well. So please, when you next watch the news, ask yourself those questions. Where is this information coming from? Who is benefiting from that information? And why is it being framed in this way to me? What are the alternative opinions that I might be able to understand? Of course, we will come to more of these questions as the night continues. And inshallah, this has been beneficial. Let's make dua, inshallah. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to hasten the appearance of Imam al-Mahdi alayhi salam, to allow us to be alongside him at all times in our life and in our death. If we are to pass away from this world, raise us from our graves so that we partake in the victories of Muhammad and Ali Muhammad. We ask you, Ya Allah, there are many people around the world going through such desperate times, those people in a state of war, oppression, poverty, homelessness, disease and disaster. Ya Allah, grant them all safety, security and victory for the sake of Muhammad and Ali Muhammad. Ya Allah, help us to fast better, help us to recite Quran better in this month, help us to achieve our goals, and help us to understand the challenges that are in front of us in the times in which we live in. Wassalamu alaikum jami'an wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Let us conclude with a salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.